Hello, beautiful people of Africa. Welcome to yet another edition of your discoursing and knowledge sharing program. It is Global Insight on your Pan-African television. And today we are talking what is very pertinent and utmost for the African continent and its people. Afrophobia and African unity. Can we see this as a crisis or a challenge? This is the question that our panel of experts will be answering in the course of today's discursive program. Just to note, ladies and gentlemen, that the African dream has recently faced growing challenges that have weakened diplomatic ties and clouded public understanding of continental events, making social, political, and economic integration more difficult. It should be noted that in 2021, progress on the African Continental Free Trade Area was stalled after ratifications by many countries as a result of armed conflict. In contemporary Africa, the vision of a united continent is further undermined by anti-migrant sentiment, often labeled xenophobia or Afrophobia, directed at Africans living particularly in South Africa, where a diplomatically active country and one of Africa's largest economies has become an epicenter of violence, inhumane attacks on migrants. These are recent events characterizing this further in South Africa. These attacks also carry a geopolitical dimension. Some leaders and analysts have actually, including former President Thabo Mbeki and voices such as those of Julius Malema and others, argue that external actors and politicized agendas have fueled these anti-migrant protests, weaponizing local grievances and exploiting socio-economic vulnerabilities for strategic ends or political reasons. Such dynamics, however, risk turning domestic instability into a continental crisis. These developments raise urgent questions about the reality of continental unity, where Afrophobia prevails, leadership lapses, of course, at the fore, and the geopolitical manipulation intensifying, especially with the wind of change blowing across the African continent. And we ask the question, can Africa still deliver its integration agenda? And of course, Afrophobia and African unity, crisis or a challenge? Let's unravel this with our panel of experts. I'll join you right after the jingle. You're welcome, ladies and gentlemen. If you are just tuning in, this is Global Insight, of course, continental unity, economic integration, and shared prosperity. And of course, the philosophy of Ubuntu has recently faced growing challenges, and that is why we are today actually analyzing the real stakes and how to actually salvage the situations or the issues affecting an integrated Africa. Without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, we dive straight away to uncovering the panel, and I will take you to the United States of America. Let's welcome Dr. A.D. Eric, Global Analyst, also Executive Secretary, Committee of Action for La Côte d'Ivoire. It's a pleasure having you on this program this day, Dr. A.D. Eric.
Good morning, Clarisse. It's always a pleasure having you. I will say good afternoon on your side, actually, and happy to be on this show with all the co-panelists that I have. It will be a mistake for me to say all names, but, you know, greetings to you all.
Thank you so much for giving importance to it. And we stay in the United States of America to acknowledge Arthur Mobley, journalist, IEC Lawyers Guide, who also doubles as the founding member of the National Association of Black Journalists and founding member of the National Black Media Coalition. Welcome to Global Insights this day.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Clarisse, and I'd like to say adieu and hello to all of my fellow panelists.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and looking forward to having constructive discussion on this very important topic that touches the African content. And now we move to France to welcome for the first time on the panel Dr. NKAA'LAA, futurist, multidisciplinary scholar. Thanks for joining us this day.
Thank you, Clarisse, for having me, and hello to all the co-panelists. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you for giving importance to such a discussion this day. To Ghana, let's welcome Mr. AMBE FOKWA, Director of the Association for Cultural Awareness. You're most welcome to this timely program.
Thank you very much for having me, Clarisse. Let me also give my best wishes to my fellow panelists and our Pan-African media followers.
Indeed, Africa uniting on the platform of Global Insight. Good news, CADOGAN, Pan-African leadership coach, is joining us from South Africa. It's a pleasure to have you this day, sir.
Thank you very much, please, and greetings to all your listeners from across the world, and also to my fellow panelists.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Dr. REINISCH, historian and journalist, will be joining us subsequently to also share insight on this very important topic. I'm coming back to you, Dr. Eddie Erika. Okay, Dr.
I'm already here, by the way.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for joining. All right, we're going to right away, ladies and gentlemen, with the first analysis, of course, defining key terms and understanding topic for discussion and giving it relevance. We start with you, Dr. Eddie Eric. We're asking if actually this is a crisis or some sort of a challenge when it comes to Afrophobia and African unity, you know, trying to contextualize the events happening in South Africa with global ramifications, especially within the African continent.
In one word, Clarissa, thank you so much. I wonder if I will be able, effectively to distinguish between the challenge or a crisis. In any case, we have a problem. When we look at what is happening in South Africa today with regard to the question of African unity, with regard to the question of the free movement of people and of goods, a protocol that exists in the African Union Charter, in the Regional Economic Communities Charter, and for the sake of Africa moving toward integrity, more toward prosperity, and toward, of course, economic development, there is this clear agreement that unity will not be just at the level of the economic level, but it is also something that should embrace, the ability for African people to establish residence, wherever. They have, of course, following protocols that exist. For me, I believe that, this is a challenge. However, whatever we want to call it a crisis, it is not reversible. It is not something that we cannot reverse, to be clear. And I see it also with my very optimistic mind as minor, although a big challenge, but minor compared to existing efforts. When we look at the prospect of the African continental free trade agreement, when we look at the trade agreement that exists between countries, when we look at the number of African countries today that are moving towards, eliminating the visa requirement for other Africans, to travel across Africa. Of course, there are other challenges. I believe that, what we are seeing in South Africa today is huge, but it is minor. But at the same time, I understand, the feelings, in the sense that, South Africa remains a key point for Africans. Some of us, were in our teens when we learned about, when Nelson Mandela being in jail and the fight of those South Africans. We were in our adulthood in college when we saw Nelson Mandela coming out of jail, touring Africa. Remember that the Nkosi Sikelele Africa, the national anthem of South Africa, became the chant for the entire African region. When today, after receiving such a massive support for the entire African continent, we see what we are are seeing in South Africa, it is heartbreaking. That is true, but at the same time, as I said, it is something that can be reversed, and the South African, authorities. At the level of the geopolitical level, as you said, I am afraid that, the South African government, were not stepping in very effectively, will continue to fuel discourses that we are hearing on this side of the world. When we hear the president of the United States, was saying that why South Africans are under attack and the reasons why he is proposing some immigration to them in the. This is the kind of discourses that can be fueled by what is happening currently in South Africa. However, in my conclusion, I believe that it is a challenge to this African Unity Project, but it is something that can be reversed with proper policies put in place.
Absolutely, it's something that can be handled to ensure that the trajectory of the African dream is not derailed in the same perspective with you also, MOBLEY, contextualizing it, it can be said that this issue that started domestically has taken another dimension, of course, bringing about some sort of strategic consequences. Like we are seeing already, there is some sort of tension diplomatically and otherwise between countries in the African continent. How can you define the present state of affairs in South Africa, and of course answering the question if it's a crisis or challenge?
Well, good morning again, Clarisse. It's morning here anyway. Probably should get my French straight. I said I do a little earlier in the introduction, and I should have said maybe bonjour. But I know English, and that's one European language. I refuse to learn two, so I'm just going to struggle with it But this is a semantical argument. It is one that I think is misplaced. Africans are not xenophobic or Afrophobic. What they are is traumatized. And it's Black Africans all over the world suffer from the same acute symptoms of trauma, whether they're in South Carolina, South Sudan, South London, South Palestine, or South Africa. We are all suffering from that same psychosis in every corner of the globe. And the only way we can resolve this trauma is by addressing the source. The source of our trauma is still white racism. Racial domination in whatever form imaginable is a morphic system, meaning it's changes in its appearance and it's never in its structural integrity. Racism was invented in Europe in the 16th century and used to justify the plunder of Africa. It was the underlying cause of every major war in natural history, from the French and Indian War in the Americas, the American Civil War, the Boer War, the war against the Herero people in Namibia, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and even the Nakba in Palestine. Apartheid was nurtured in America, in slavery, in Jim Crow, and then transferred back to Africa, where it was essentially perfected. Most people don't know that the separation of separate but equal design of Jim Crow in America was the blueprint for apartheid in South Africa. Look it up. White racism or Jim Crow apartheid manifest as separate but equal in the US and then morphed into the discrimination and prejudice we now see reincarnated in immigration enforcement against Black and brown people from the Caribbean, from Mexico, in France and Italy and England. The tide of immigration restrictions wash up on the shores of the Mediterranean in body counts of the millions in desperate Africans trying to escape the same trauma. What we call xenophobia is more like 2.0. It's more precisely apartheid v. proxy. It's the same violence we fought against in the Spanish Sahara, Polisario group and movement there. It's the same violence Franz Fanon fought against in Algeria. Milcar Cabral fought it in Guinea-Bissau. The MPLA fought it in Angola. Zapu and Zanu defeated it in Rhodesia. And the brave people of South Africa absorbed the bullets in Sharpeville and Soweto from this same system. Xenophobia is just a new petty bourgeois term masking the same racist war on Black people. Even when it is hidden and masked in blackface, it is still the same, and we need to address it as it is.
It as it is to ensure that the African dream is not entangled or derailed. From the cultural perspective, of course, looking at the human interest part of it with you, AMBE, FOKWA, let's try to see how, headlines, behind headlines of riots and borders, some sort of, an effect of such a crisis affecting the human mind, and of course keeping them in a state of uncertainty as to what is is left for them in South Africa.
Well, I want to build on top of what my brother just actually explained in his discourse, because it really is the core of the situation. We have, I don't want to call it necessarily a crisis, but it's an ongoing system of exploitation. So there is a crisis in it. But the fact that we are having difficulty as Africans with truly realizing the source of this conflict and then grappling with it, that's where I don't want to necessarily just leave it in that conflict definition. Look at it more as a crisis, because we have crisis situations when they are difficult to manage. And the situation we're seeing difficult to manage on the African continent, specifically with South Africa, goes back to, it's going to sound like a deviation to some, but I've had a lot of discussions in social media platforms with South Africans to come to the conclusion with them that we have more of an issue with, I would say, the failure of governance in interior African countries. And I'm saying interior African countries to distinguish them from South Africa at the southern region of the continent. Because what we want to start following, if we look at this, let's say historically, or in the context of the current events, we started a reparations lobby collectively, continentally, that went to the UN in March. So we had a front towards what I would call this situation in conflict with the apartheid, this situation in conflict with the colonialism, this situation in conflict with the consequences of the enslavement of our dominant melanated people in the United States. We were moving in a collective towards addressing that. Then, interestingly, President Macron came out and said he was a Pan-Africanist. He was in Kenya. He was supposed to come to Ghana, but did something live. Then the Pope apologized for slavery. It means the Pope, he saw the collective movement, he saw the lobby, and he acknowledged that the Vatican, with its authorization of the enslavement of our people, which led to this colonialism and eventually even the apartheid in South Africa, with his profession of that acknowledgement of remorse, he expressed his guilt. So we know where the crime came from. And then in all of this recognition that we have identified our culprit, and we've come together to call them to justice, suddenly the media, the Western media, starts framing this idea of a focus on a migrancy issue in South Africa, which is still related to the fact that we were invaded by Europeans. They invaded other African countries. In the United States, they set up we call them a colonial settler, or is it a settler colonial administration and structure. In South Africa, they did the same thing. That's what I'm really trying to land on. And a lot of us Africans, we've not acknowledged the fact that the European whites, who are the capitalists controlling the economy in South Africa, they remained, but they left in the rest of Africa. They remained in the United States of America and set up a colonizer government on top of the original nations, and everyone else who's migrated there is still suffering this consequence. So we're not looking at this in the total context that our brothers in South Africa have gone through the exact same thing that all indigenous people, especially dominant melanated African people, have suffered on this planet. But because when you listen to a lot of the reports, we hear Nigerians predominantly who have a failed government in their country. They have a presidency that, I mean, like Paul Biya in Cameroon, always out, corruption, embezzlement. We have an issue now, people like social influencers, a very dark man campaigning online about the children being kidnapped in Nigeria. The fact that in almost every region in Nigeria, people are easily kidnapped. This is a country where you can be in a police station and your organs can still be harvested while being in detention in a jail. That's the level of, we could say, governmental collapse Nigeria is in. To the fact and point that even before we would look at the reparations issue, we also had here in Ghana a complaint against, you know, the Igbo Eze declaring that he had a title which gave him the right to create like a tribal colony in Ghana. And there was negative sentiments against the Nigerians. And then that also down in South Africa again. So it might sound like a big collage of information, but it's like we are dealing with a situation where on one side we have a history of exploitation and disenfranchisement from the colonial European West, the British, the Dutch who are still in South Africa, you know, the Spanish, the French who are still, I mean, you see what Captain Traore is going through. We have them on one side. Then we have their puppet administrations, which they've set up in Africa to continue to assist them in creating this deprived situation. And then we have the consequences of our people in countries like Nigeria and others where they are dealing with it. And then their people always want to use these terms that I'm going out for greener pastures. Now, if their governments were not failing, would they be looking in South Africa as opposed to Nigeria, the giant of Africa is what Nigeria is, to be saying, I want greener pastures in South Africa, to the point that you would have so many migrants going out of your country, to the point that it does create a noticeable economic load in the South African economy, coming out of apartheid, having a dominance.
Yes, so
I don't think just go ahead and land, but I mean, if I just lay that as a foundation, that gives you my own way of looking that the consciousness of our people is not adopted collectively on the continent. What is going on and how we should approach the situation in a unified form to solve it.
Indeed, it's a fragile situation, and of course, analyzing it from every angle is imperative to ensuring that there is a solution that actually will not, taint the African dream. In the same perspective, now I come to you, Good News, CADOGAN. You're joining us from South Africa, living the reality of the situation. And what can we say is the state of affairs now at this juncture? We remember how the President Cyril Ramaphosa said that South African laws are not racist, and we can also see diverse narratives actually positioning South Africa as an enemy in court of the African continent with the recent anti-migrant, protests. What can we analyze from the stakes?
Greetings to my fellow panelists and to listeners across the world. I would like to repeat the context, but not entirely. There is pressure in South Africa currently on our systems, clinics, schools, housing and jobs. They're all under pressure. When the queues are long and people are struggling to get services, they tend to look outside themselves, outside the government, outside everything, and start blaming those that have come in from other countries. Illegal migration and porous borders is a reality. Our government, South African government, failed to manage the entry and exit from our borders. Undocumented entry, human trafficking, and cross-border crime. These are real issues that South Africans are facing currently. And thirdly, economic competition. In the townships that were created and the legacy of the apartheid system, as actually narrated by many of my fellow panelists, actually find themselves competing for the same informal jobs and trading spaces with these undocumented migrants. These are policy problems. These are government and governance issues. They require law enforcement, they require border management, they require economic growth, and they also require service delivery. But when policy fails, what happens then? Emotions fill the gap. And that's where Afrophobia goes. It grows because it tells a Zimbabwean nurse that her accent is the reason the clinic has no medicine. It tells a Somali shop owner that his presence is the reason I am unemployed. It tells a Congolese student on campus at a university in South Africa that he does not belong on the African campus. All of these things put together, they betray our history. South Africa did not fight apartheid alone, as it was just said a few minutes ago.
Sure.
The frontline states under the old OAU, currently the African Union, housed exiles that came from South Africa that were fighting the system of apartheid at the time. This also undermines our future in terms of our trade agreements. The first panelist spoke about an agreement that exists that needs to be honored for free movement of people and goods. But that free movement of people and goods needs to be done under a protocol so that criminals do not take advantage of the freedom that we are creating in terms of moving. So porous borders are not an answer to the need for free movement of people and goods. There are four things that I would like to suggest that need to happen. One, there's a need to enforce the law without dehumanizing people and also without vigilantism. There needs to be the rule of law that we fought for, that we put in place in 1994, needs to be there. South Africa has the right to secure its borders and deport those who break the law.
Absolutely.
That is not Afrophobia. It is governance, but enforcement must be constitutional, and there must be no mob justice. What we see on TV, where people, ordinary citizens, go door to door, taking people out, checking people out, and finding them and wanting to arrest them and also do the work of the police. That is not acceptable. Most of the anger that you see today, I think it's about, it comes from scarcity. We must accelerate job creation and understand that the economy of today, for most of the African states, from Cape to Cairo, is the economy of the 1600s that was crafted during the Berlin Conference. It's an extractive type of economy that does not beneficiate goods and the ore that we get out of the ground. And as a result, therefore, we are exporting jobs to Europe, to the West.
Okay.
That's what is happening. Without beneficiating the raw materials that we get out of the ground, we are not going to have the jobs that everybody is yearning for.
Indeed.
So not only is South Africa failing at this, all other countries also are failing because we are not developing downstream economies.
Indeed, this is actually where the problematic lies and what is the way forward. Let's go to you, Dr. AA'LAA. We've listened to the other speakers highlight some of very key aspect of the situation in South Africa, and reiterated in the preamble that then President Thabo Mbeki highlighted and said that what is happening is actually an agenda, and that is why we want to understand from your perspective, if what is happening is an agenda, because we are seeing it being sustainable to an extent, how can the South African government, the whole leadership of Africa, navigate this situation to ensure that the vulnerability of South Africans and Africans in general are not used as weapons against their own government and the future of the continent?
Thank you once more, Clarice, for having me, and greetings to all the viewers. Yeah, I think I agree with the diagnosis that my co-panelists have already provided on this topic, because this is an issue that has both historical and futuristic dimensions, but of course we are experiencing it in the present. So I may not have to dig again deeper into the historical aspects, the trauma, the role of apartheid, and the deep inequalities that it has created in South Africa, but also partly or to an extent elsewhere on the African continent. But about is this an agenda? I would say yes and no. Yeah, yes. I would say it is. First, the no. The no part is that because if we go by looking at this from the historical perspective, it may be a kind of an outdated agenda. Because if we look at this and we understand that yes, as our core panelist, Mr. GOODNEWS, was saying, this issue is traced back to the way that colonization tried to structure Africa. Like up to today, we are still perceived in the minds of industrialized nations of the West as a farm for harvesting raw materials. Africa is a farm. So if we go by this way, we understand that it's an old agenda that we know for a long time, that whereby global value chains have been structured in such a way that we just provide raw materials. But then, for how many years have we been independent and we are not trying to fight that agenda? That's a question that we may want to ask. Of course, we understand that even our neo-colonialism is still quite strong against what we may want to do, but I think that we are not doing it sufficiently. So that's why I would say to an extent it's not an agenda. But however, I will also say it is an agenda. The agenda can be, to an extent, a mistake or ignorance on the part of some Africans, especially some of those Black South Africans that are now taking the law into their hands. And why I say so is because we now know that it is not in the interest of anybody in the world, whether it is the Europeans, whether it is North Americans, whether it is the Chinese, it is not in the interest of anyone in the world for Africa to be united. It is not, and it will not be soon. It is only in our own interest to be united. And that's why each time we see infighting on the continent, whether like the most brutal war-like situations, whether they are in Cameroon, in the English-speaking parts, or whether they are in Sudan, whether they are the endless wars we have in the Northeast DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, these are always conflicts that if you analyze deep down, you will see economic root causes with people or forces outside of the continent funding them in order to be able to grab what they need. And so this divide and rule tactic is something that is old on the continent. And we need to unite, and nobody will come and do that unity for us. But what I wanted to point out now, because I've tried to at least show that this is both an agenda to an extent, but also sometimes the mistakes of our present governance systems, because I don't want to take off the responsibility or irresponsibility that some of our national governments have in the continent. I don't want to do that, but I just wanted to point out the larger forces that combine with inefficient governance or ineffective leadership on the continent to create what we are doing. But I want to say something that is still going to happen. It may not continue to be like Black South Africans saying to other Black Africans, oh, you are grabbing our jobs, or you are putting pressure on our economy, on housing, on clinics, and so on and so forth, which is true now. But we need to also look at this going forward, because the job situation on the continent is an alarming state. Because today we are in 2026, and before now, we've already had alarming rates of unemployment among young people. But now, even some of the jobs, whether they are informal or not, on which young people have been depending, are going to be wiped out by AI. Of course, AI is creating some new jobs, but the truth about those jobs is that most of the jobs created by AI are jobs that you need some certain skill level and sophistication before you can then upgrade to be able to work with AI and not AI working for you. Okay, now, if we don't resolve these issues, we are going to see more and more people turn their frustration, because you look at even Europe today, polarization on the far right, far left, and then blame games on immigrants, Black Africans or immigrants from elsewhere, migrants from elsewhere in the world, in Europe and in North America. You understand that these issues are usually because once people feel frustrated, they start looking for who to blame. And in most cases, they are blaming the wrong persons. That is the same thing that is happening. So we need to be prepared. In the next 20, 30 years, there will be more frustration on the continent because there will be more and more young people who want jobs, and those jobs will not be existing for the reasons we already know, for the reasons that we are exporting our jobs to Europe by sending raw materials on processed raw materials or sending unprocessed agricultural products, but also even the fact that AI will take away some of the jobs that people could do on the continent. And once this happens, there will be some of the people in their ignorance will turn to blame other Africans. And I think it is now time for us as a continent look into these issues very seriously and address them in a preventive manner. Because if you look at a country like Madagascar, we've seen young people already demonstrated recently and they overthrew their government. If you look at a country like Kenya, young people, the Gen Zs, have demonstrated, although they have not been able to do what people did in Madagascar. But these are symptoms that in our future, we need to deal with these issues now, to do strategic planning to make sure that we preempt and prevent these issues and build the unity of our continent on all fronts, but most especially the economic front. Because I don't think culturally we have
I will
any
come back to you
unity.
subsequently, Dr. Mala. We'll come back to, what we need to do, and we take with you, Dr. Data. It has been affirmed by the previous speaker that it's actually an agenda, and we know it when looking at it from the geopolitical perspective. The vulnerability of young people or unemployed people is always a weapon for political gains. Yesterday, that is the 10th of July 2026, when the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, was addressing the summit in France, he noted that during the apartheid period, education was used as a weapon to actually, enslave Africans. And then he reiterated that the same education can be used today to help Africa break free from some sort of colonial legacy. And now we are seeing that the weapon today is the joblessness or the vulnerability of young people in South Africa, where they now see other Africans as a threat to their not being, employed or having the basic necessities of that they actually, would love to have in their country. What can we say of this? Doctor?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me to this really important conversation today. And I mean, you mentioned a few things, education and joblessness, and these are crucial aspects that are usually neglected in the discussion here in Western Europe. I'm in Berlin, in Germany at the moment, joining you, and let me first start. With what is the picture that is presented in the European media and therefore to the European community about Africa as such, and also about the recent events that we are discussing, because the underlying issues that you addressed are the challenges, the problems, the aftermaths and the continuation of colonialism and neocolonialism, and this is relevant in the mindset of the European media. And that's why I think it's crucially important. And I hope that many people in the West, many Europeans, will watch our discussion today, because when Africa is addressed in the media, we see only it's very, very little addressed there. I just read a study about news reports about the African continent, the whole African continent, in German TV media, and in the whole year 2024, there were only less than 10 minutes about news reports in the main German news about the whole African continent. I mean, this is great. It very much reflects the continuation of colonialism, and and because of that, such discussions to better understand the situation are crucial. And now let me come to the points that you have mentioned. Yes, the vulnerability of young people, and as you said, also education used as a weapon. Nowadays, it's a joblessness, and many things that my previous speakers have addressed. I can fully agree with them. The problem with the question of joblessness and the underlying economic foundations is that, although, yes, it's right that there are failings of the African governments, no doubt about that, but these are all direct consequences of the fact that we are on the crossroads of history at the moment, and that one crucial battlefield is Africa. And the economic dependence and the continued economic exploitation, in particular a renewed exploitation. Colonialism never completely ended, but a renewed focus of Africa to exploit the whole continent with all consequences, and with all consequences: economic struggle, political struggle, joblessness, as you mentioned, the focus, the grabbing of the European Union, France, once again, because we're seeing here the battlefield played out between the transatlantic hegemony of US and the EU and emerging multipolar world. A necessity would be to come out of this situation, would be a stronger unity, not only on the African continent against Western dominance, but particularly forging links among the global South, among the BRICS, towards emerging multipolarity, so that, exactly as my previous speaker mentioned, that these emotions that we are now seeing that we are seeing now in the media are not a result of this pressure, this continued pressure, and this continued economic exploitation of the African continent by the old imperialist and colonial powers.
Brings us back to you, Dr. Eddie Erika, noting that we need to touch the root causes of these, violent activities which have been, overwhelmed either by political aspirations and to a larger extent the geopolitical entanglement, given that South Africa represents a pivotal nation across the African continent, be it diplomatically and otherwise. So let's try to understand how we can solve the present situation with some sort of governance and leadership.
The first thing that I think I heard and read from the South African leadership at the moment is that it is a situation the program that is going on currently is condemnable. That's the very first attitude. The second thing that, what I also see positive and that needs to be done is for the South African authorities to continue to reassure their peers, on the continent, whether it's from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Zimbabwe, Angola, and all of those countries that have Malawi, that have, the nationals, in those countries that are being, repatriated, this, diplomatic level, things that needs to be also be reassured. In addition to that, I think my brother, Good News, said something that is very relevant, very important in terms of the root causes of these issues. I agree with the rest of the panelists that, but we cannot, and Clarisse, you know me, I will never be on the side of those who believe that, Africa only holds responsibility for the status of the state of its affairs now, without linking all that what we have now to the past of to the colonial past that those countries experience. So, in addition to that, I believe that one point that I'm taking away from what Brother Good News said, which is valid for me, is the pressure on social and educational and healthcare infrastructures. Yes, when you have migration or immigration, it has impact or it affects both the sending countries and the receiving countries or the host countries. In terms of the sending countries, the people who leave are workers. The people who leave are valid workforce. Somebody mentioned, I think it was my brother NSAH, who talked about, the youthfulness of the labor force in Africa today. If this youth is moving around today, migration within Africa tends to be less, more are leaving the continent, for using the North America and the European, migration corridors. But within Africa, it is also happening, which means that the host and receiving countries need to also up their infrastructures, both at the economic level, the creation of jobs, but also the social pressures in terms of social protection, point blank. The people who move and migrate, whether it is through porous borders or not, are people who move with their families. And if they do not move with their families, when they get to the host country, we are all human beings, even during colonial time, during the time of the slave trade. Not long ago, I was in Gorée, Senegal, to visit again the doors of no return. But it's not just the doors of no return. It is also the history about the señoras. Who are those señoras? These are people, kids, women that were fathered by the slave traders in there. What point am I making? People make babies. People meet. People, will have families. But those families increase the population, which means that, social, economic, and healthcare infrastructures also needs to be improved. When you have this mass migration, the population is increasing, and you have those social economic infrastructure lagging behind, it creates the sort of problem that we have. So I do agree that as we talk about the free movement of people, we talk about the free movement of goods. By the way, goods are moving faster in Africa today than human beings are moving. But even with that one, I believe that we cannot just stay at the level of our policies. There needs to be some measures following that. I give you another example. Today, South Africa is showing that. But let us remember one thing. Not to take the spotlight away from South Africa and justify that, but let us remember that, in the 1980s, the same thing happened between Ghana and Nigeria. Ghana resolved to expel Nigerians, nationals in Ghana. I think it was around 1983 or 1994, but don't quote me very well, but I know it happened in the 1980s. Again, it was the time when Ghana was experiencing, a severe economic, downturn. And those things, happen like that. So I believe that, Clarisse, as we talk about, what needs to be done, how to tackle that. Yes, it is true. We want Africans to move around. We want African unity, but all those things, will come at a cost. And I'm going to land on this. In the current world that, we live in, somebody mentioned AI. This is the technology that we have today. But our countries are also being threatened by quite a number of things. What are they? Cyber criminality is on the rise. Kleptocracy is on the rise. Who is entering with what in our respective countries? And to what extent whatever they are entering with is not illicit enough to jeopardize what we have in those countries. These are some of the dimensions of this mass migration that we are seeing, of the problem that each of those African countries today are facing. Each of those African countries is facing without necessarily developing the measures. We are happy to see the certain African countries and many other African countries being today, they are suppliers of these critical minerals, critical materials. It is bringing a lot of investment, but at the same time, I agree with people. There is a gap between the investments and the jobs that are being created. Economists today are talking about jobless growth. African countries are talking about, oh yeah, growth, economic growth, but this growth is not following, or job creation is not properly following economic growth. If not, why is that? Young people, valid young people, continue to leave the continent. The number of Nigerian doctors that leave Nigeria to go serve in the UK is humongous. I'm going to handle that, not to host the mic too long, Clarisse, but I yield back to you on with those examples.
Absolutely, Dr. Edi, a very pertinent aspect of the continent. Some pundits feel that to solve these human-related problems of the continent, especially the vibrant African youths, the problem of unemployment, it is imperative to ensure that the economic fabric of the continent is boosted, is given a new face. Now with you, Otto Mobley, we have noticed that it's, the underlying factor or the cause of these sentiments or anti-migrant sentiments boils down to the fact that many young people, though vibrant, are made redundant. Political systems do not favor them, and like Dr. Edi highlighted, the gap between investment and job creation is actually questionable. So now this is where we find ourselves. How can we use this as some sort of a parameter to solving the existing human problem of joblessness in South Africa to an extent, helping it not to be porous for infiltration or infringement by a larger geopolitical actor?
Well, thank you. Again, Clarisse, there are two radiant examples in the world that we can look at very quickly and understand this as a more macro issue and what it actually does and its effect on people. We have a wall around much of Palestine because Israel wants to keep the Palestinians separated and contained from the rest of Israel. We have a wall on the southern border in the United States because the U.S. is making an effort to keep brown people and other people out of the country, or either control that immigration into the country. Europe doesn't have the walls up, but they've got natural barriers like the Mediterranean, and their design is basically the same. Racism and capitalism always has tried to prevent or either manage the movement of people in ways that serves racism and capitalism. And it hasn't changed. And if you don't change the system, it's a destructive system that causes the same challenges, then you're going to get the same results. And that's what we're seeing in South Africa right now. I was in South Africa in 1994 and the election. I was one of the election monitors and observers of that great point in history to see that happening. And I saw in South Africa the congregation of people from all over the world. We were there from all over the world to witness this transformation that was taking place, the handover from the apartheid white minority government back to the African people, back to the African leadership in the country that was going to move forward. And that organization, the ANC, and the PAC, and the EFF, they're all still there in South Africa. And the momentum stopped. It didn't move. It didn't go forward. And it didn't seek to really change the structures that were in place that were causing the problems in the first place. So I saw this in Nigeria and Ghana, as one of the panelists mentioned earlier. It's happened in Egypt, it's happened in Morocco, and certainly happened in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. We've got to change the structure on the ground. How many African people have been moved around since colonialism inside the continent of Africa, moved from one area to another, and are completely separated from their ancestral homelands? A lot of them, I would submit, have gone through that process on the continent. We can't continue to think that South Africa and Nigeria and Ghana and what is developing in Guinea-Bissau and Zimbabwe, they're the old economic centers of colonialism. And we can't expect that those economic centers of colonialism are to remain stagnant. And the rest of Africa is supposed to be these raw material gathering states that just pull in raw materials and then feed it back through these same centers that Europe set up in the first place and operate in that old system. We need 10 South Africas around the continent. We need 20 Burkina Fasos around the continent. We need 30 Nigerias around the country. We need to spread and stratify the ability to create momentum, jobs, infrastructure throughout the continent. And who can do that? Who can do that? Only the most important resource on the African continent, which is not diamonds, it's not gold, it's not tantalum, it's the people. The people of Africa can do that, can make that adjustment and make that change. They're the only people that can do that. And until Africa runs Africa, and Africa controls African resources, no country should even call itself a nation. You're not a nation because you control one little segment. You're a nation because you can lead people, you can lead designs, and you can create new structures in Africa. And again, I don't want to talk too long because I know we've got a lot of panelists, and I know we would like to spread it around. Let's hear some more feedback, and I will yield at that point.
There is one key aspect with you. I want to, analyze this with you, AMBE, FOKWA. We are looking at the area of narratives. The African Revolution, many people see it as political, others see it economically, and otherwise. But then there's this aspect of that, it is not actually given the relevance it holds. That is the narrative that the African media shapes for the African people to better understand. And I think to an extent, as to some pundits, it is imperative for Africans to understand the real stakes on the continent to be able to mitigate this adverse effect of anti-migrant protests across the the Republic of South Africa, and even elsewhere, because it's already having a spiral effect across the continent. So with you, AMBE, FOKWA, what agenda, media agenda do you think we need to set at this juncture to be able to, put all the forces together to make South Africans understand the stakes, to make Africans who are living in South Africa, especially those involved in very questionable activities. We are talking about cyber criminality and drugs, among others, that Dr. Eddie and others highlighted already. So how can we use this narrative to shape a new mindset that will bring forth, you know, a different Africa?
Well, honestly, Clarisse, we see it happening already before I would need to explain it. Naturally, when information and this type of a situation goes forward, it's going to create public opinion and public policy. This is what we're doing on the panel right now. The social media has been vibrating. We saw President Ramaphosa attempted to extend his hand to President Mahama in Ghana. Unfortunately, President Mahama rejected that opportunity for diplomacy. But that's what we see happening. We see that diplomacy, that interaction, the engagement of us looking at our own existential issues. Despite many people who, when it started, there was a lot of negativity against South Africa. There was a lot of people who were leaning on what I would like to call, perhaps it's more like, you know, the West took the idea of, let's say, the flooding in Ghana. Let me use that for an example. There was flooding in Ghana. Ghana recently took the forefront of the reparations argument. Why is the West going to highlight some months later an emphasis on some infrastructural flaws in Ghana as opposed to highlighting certain positive initiatives the president or the country might be taking? You see what I'm trying to bring out? We have a situation in Africa where, since we don't control our international media wires, I was surprised to even discover the other day that I think they were telling me something about multi-choice or something in South Africa, that it was even bought by Canal Plus recently. We have so many situations on the continent where, just like you bring out in your question, Clarisse, we're not controlling our narrative. So the view that our media should be giving our population in these type of situations doesn't fully portray our existential realities from a position of, you have a problem, you move to a solution. You have the Western media, you know, campaigning, the optics, the data centers of our social media is controlled by them, the satellites, you know, CNN, all of it. That's where a lot of African media organizations get their own informations, because unfortunately we don't have correspondence in a lot of Western countries. A lot of our media don't have that economic capacity to sustain correspondence and reporting. So the West, definitely, they are giving us our narrative. They are controlling our collective consciousness. They are influencing our psychological state through their social media, though we claim we have a social media. And until we get to a point where we realize this information war, this psychological warfare that Lieutenant Michael Aquino identified in his text mind war, that they don't want to use nuclear weapons to fight. They've realized fear factor and psychological operations better control populations to manipulate them. With Africa, that's what they are doing. Do we have a CIA in Ghana or South Africa? What are the equivalences of federal bureaus, of you know, MI6s, of all of these intelligence? What do we have in Africa that counters this psychological warfare? We're not still at that point. And until we really organize ourselves into realizing that, just like my brother Mobley pointed it out, we are in a position where we have an issue of our sovereignty that we're supposed to be fighting for, to put it in the forefront and restore it. If we don't get to that level, then this situation of sitting down, letting foreign media tell us there's Afrophobia, there's xenophobia in South Africa, will captivate people's minds. Meanwhile, gradually, I will be happy as I'm going to land on this. I've seen the transition at last. So like I say, public sphere, public opinion, information, it goes through a feedback process. We have been seeing people from Nigeria, especially now, a lot of people are starting to land on it. Why can't the government create enabling conditions in the country so that this whole idea of Japa, going for greener pastures, which translates into a problem that all African countries face with brain drain. Captain Traore recently read, he pronounced that no student from Burkina Faso can travel out of the country to study without government authorization. They want to be sure you're going out to study things that you would actually come back to benefit Burkina Faso. Because if we want to talk of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement and migrancy and your right to move around, Migrancy should mean that you are going to a country to contribute something that will develop its economy. You shouldn't be leaving Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana to go to South Africa or some other African country with, we could say, a more stable economic infrastructure to a degree to sell buckets or to fry beignets, as they say in French, or puff puff, and then be arguing that it's your right to not counter the opposition, or to not counter the ruling party in your country with the opposition, to go to another country and do that. We need a media that speaks like that to us, that looks at the problems concretely from an African perspective. And though we have the issues of the past that have created the conditions for these problems, we need a media that talks to us progressively with an ancestral logic that this is who we are, this is where we were, this is where we were going and who we wanted to become. Now, this is what derailed us. And then in our current event structuring now, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, we know this is what we need to do. We know this is what we're happening. We have individuals like Captain Traore. We always talk about Traoreism, who have shown that despite all of that, in an RBG Pan-African philosophy, we take it to self-reliance and do for self. Let me land with that.
Imperative to set the right agenda for the African people to be able actually to emancipate them in the process of interpreting continental issues and their very role, especially the young people, in contributing to this dream of a united continent at every front. Let me come back to you, Good News Cadogan. We've listened keenly to the stakes and to the analysis given, but then let's remain in South Africa, looking at the parliament at the moment. The last elections saw South Africa, I don't know if I should put it, between the West and the East. And we know that we have accepted in this panel already that there is a large agenda, very complex one in South Africa. We are looking at how the prevailing situation is as a result of the hung parliament in the country, and also, some sort of a political agenda to change the status quo of South Africa. The ruling ANC has been facing some criticisms lately, and we know the Democratic Alliance is part of the ruling class at the moment. So how do we try to understand the existing political maneuvering in the country, and then how it is actually providing a breeding ground for the external infringement for an extended agenda that is putting vulnerable South Africans in a complex web, and then they are expressing their frustrations towards black.
Beautiful. That's a very good question. And I believe that the changes that have come through in South Africa since the last elections and the establishment of the government of national unity actually, I think I'm a minority amongst watchers of trends and patterns of what's going on in South Africa, in the sense that I believe it took centuries to get to 1994 that my brother spoke about, when he was here monitoring the changeover from the white minority rule to the black majority taking over from a political point of view, where in fact at that time there hasn't been a change that is significant insofar as economic transformation is concerned. So the establishment of the government of national unity, for me, I see it as a premature change. It is not good for our country, and it falls into two buckets of things. The first bucket of what I'm looking at is what I refer to as own goals. Yes, there's a whole lot of stuff going on with geopolitics, the West, and everything else that is against South Africa, insofar as majority black rule is concerned. But I believe that the ANC government scored a lot of own goals against what it was supposed to create. Like, for example, the economy the extractive economy that we inherited from the apartheid government has not shifted an inch towards ensuring that beneficiation, whether it's agri-products or it's the ore out of the ground, gets beneficiated within, so that we may have a thriving economy that is growing in double digits. That is possible. It's not like as if it's far-fetched. But at the same time, I think in order for South Africa to actually go back to where it was, where the ANC had like 66%, 62% at some point in the beginning of the electorate supporting them, you find that now it's below 40%. It's probably gonna go into the 20s, if I am not mistaken in my own analysis. And that is going to pose even bigger threats, as we have discussed in this panel. So there's a kind of a change that is required, and I'm not sure how it's going to happen to actually get to a point whereby the African agenda re-emerges again in South Africa. And that, for me, I do not have an answer as to how it's going to come about.
Indeed, the African agenda re-emerging in South Africa, that is the question that we'll be channeling to you, Dr. Mala. Earlier on, you talked about the mistakes of governance systems, and of course, highlighting that Africa is a farm where, actors farm their raw materials. That is the sphere of influence of many great powers across the continent. And let's try now to understand from what Good News Cadogan just highlighted, to try to see how, these governance mistakes can be solved to an extent, to be able to curtail the pressure that the population, of course, the human capital and vulnerable youths are actually facing or experiencing at this moment, to ensure that in the future, the dream of Africa can't be, derailed, using Africans themselves, especially the young people. We're still looking at the position where the Hung Parliament in South Africa is a setback and it's a breeding ground to the anti-migrant protests that we are facing today, having such, great ramifications across the continent.
Thank you once more. Yeah, I think I will talk about a couple of points, which are suggestions, and I'm adding them to the brilliant ideas that my co-panelists have already also shared. First, with the narratives, I think practically speaking, we need to have some kinds of African Dangotes that also start funding a globally visible, present, and media houses that carry the African voice across the globe, because we are trying to do some good work in economically through people like Dangote, but at the level of the narratives, we are still projected as people without any agency. So our narrative is still controlled elsewhere. If you take even writing, filmmaking, generally the big prizes that our people win usually come from outside the continent. And you may not know, for those of us who are also writers, quite often, until recently, it was like if you write a novel about Africa and they don't see children with barefoot, or they don't see what we call poverty porn, then nobody gives you a prize. So those are things we need to work against, because if you see Parisian movies and film from Berlin, you will hardly see the people sleeping on the bridges. But that doesn't mean that they are not there. So it's about who controlling narratives. Secondly, I want to talk about the economically. I think that one elephant in the room we need to point, of course, we need growth. We need economic growth and prosperity, but we also need to be careful how we pursue it, because capitalism, there is wealth, there is money in the world today, but that money is mostly concentrated in the hands of a few individuals. And so how do we make sure that we pursue economic policies that are not hyper-centralized around GDP? Because sometimes GDP will be telling us the figures, and usually maybe not the good figures. And that's why we are saying that GDP has been improving for a number of our countries, but there are no corresponding jobs accompanying that GDP. So these are things we have to rethink. and infuse our own conception of Ubuntu or Afro-capitalism into the economic system of the world, because capitalism is also an issue. But coming now to the governance, and I will end with governance and education. I think on the governance level, we are also still being administered for the large part by people who have political inclinations and leadership perceptions of the 16th and 15th century. Because we still see a lot of African countries where you wake up in the morning and then the president and with a few people in his cabinet comes with a vision 2035 or 2055 or a 20 whatever. We don't know where that vision is from. And that's a vision that they paid one consultancy left and right, and they designed it without consulting the people of that country. We need to move towards governance that is collective, that is participatory, that we ask our people, we consult our people. And the internet has even made it much cheaper and easier to consult people without spending a lot of money. And ask Cameroonians, what do we want? Ask South Africans, what do we want? So that we stop having this kind of one man knows everything and come out with visions. And in this direction, I'm working on a project. We call it Africa 2025, and we are saying, how can we reimagine the future of Africa in the next 500 years? Because in the past 500 years, a lot has happened to us, and most often that a lot has been happening planned elsewhere, and we are like on the receiving end. How about we really plan now in a very strategic manner to shape the world, because we have everything that it needs to be a powerful voice in the world. And to end it last now on the educational point, if you take the case of Cameroon, where I come from, we cannot have educational systems that continue to produce a lot of job seekers, that continue to sell a lie to people that to be a successful person, you need to graduate from university, hold a file in your armpit and run around looking for jobs or go to a NAM. That is a lie. Governments like those of Cameroon, I think they owe an apology to our people on having in one way or the other made it for people to think that we should be sending children to technical schools who are not intelligent, because that is what is actually happening. Whereas the people who actually go to technical schools are most of the times people you will never hear them complaining about jobs, because they have things they can do with their hands. So we need to rethink our educational system and also think things like accreditation and how we can move fast, because today universities in the Western world are already creating courses and programs that correspond and respond to AI and the disruptions it is bringing. But in some countries, including Cameroon now, if you want to design a new program now, the bureaucracy to having that program approved and running can make it such that we are not able to compete globally. So these are things we have to make sure we address if we want to move forward as a people who are respected and are no longer the people who have been the most exploited.
In this very fast evolving society, how can we make Africans ready for the job? I think Rwandan President Paul Kagame one time actually asked those questions to the young people. Are you ready to actually take opportunity when it comes, as we are looking for this investment? Is the skill available, ready for the opportunities that are coming? And of course, I will come back to you, Dr. Dete, on the aspect of narrative. I think it's very imperative. And let's take what is happening in South Africa and relate with the recent events in Iran. Of course, you were there in Iran, and you actually had an encounter or one-on-one exchange with Iranians. And you notice to an extent different narratives about, you know, the Khamenei that was killed, and what the people think about the leadership and how they are saddened by the turn of events. We bring it again now to South Africa. Here we want to look at how you know, mainstream media set an agency or agenda that keeps the people, very vital elements of a society or a country, in some sort of a state of doubt or uncertainty, which makes them more vulnerable and open to radicalism, as the case we see, some cases we see in South Africa, and the consequences stirring or probably making diplomatic connections very questionable. Dr. Data, the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, hello. Sorry, what, can you just repeat the last part of the question, please?
we want to relate what is happening in South Africa with what you recently witnessed in Iran. You know, Iranians,
Yes.
by mainstream media, portraying Iranians like people who do not want their supreme leader, but on the ground it's something different. And then the situation in South Africa, still looking at how there can be this mental cleansing that will make the people not prone to radicalism or being used as tool for political engagement.
Yes, I think it's a very, very important point, and it has been mentioned by several other speakers. This question of the narrative, this question of the media, that the challenges that Africa is facing, that they receive their narrative from the West because of lack of resources, and also. And then at the same time, how is then these Western media, these Western narratives, how they are portraying Africa, the people in Africa, the economy, the society. I mentioned in my first comment that there's almost no reporting about Africa, particularly almost no about sub-Saharan Africa in Western media, and everything that we see, all the narrative that we see is always negative, failings, and this is very similar to the media narrative that is provided in Iran, for instance. Failed country, a failed country, they have nothing, they are against their government. And then, as you said, I just came back from a week in Tehran, the capital, participating in the funeral ceremonies of Khamenei, and what I experienced there was the complete opposite, exactly the opposite what the media is telling, and it was not controlled or anything. It was just, I went out, I spoke with the people, and the people were very open. No ressentiments regarding foreigners. On the contrary, they were happy to see me. They were happy that I was there. They wanted to talk with me, but the crucial point that I could also see, and this brings us also back to the conversation that we and comments that we heard from other speakers: education. What I witnessed was a highly educated a population, resilient, in support of their leader Said Ali Khamenei, in support of their government, despite all the hardship, despite all the pressure that is coming from the West, with the sanctions regime, with the false narrative in Western media. And actually, this is actually because we're talking about here resources. Iran is a rich country. Africa is rich. Africa is being exploited. Iran is suffering under a sanctions regime. But the dynamics actually that we've seen in Iran is actually an example, or shall be an example, for a lot of African governments, how you, despite the imperialist and colonial pressure from the West, how to emancipate through what Iran did was the so-called resistance economy, education for the young. In this way, despite imperialist pressure, providing the young, providing the population a perspective to be resilient, to prosper, to have a a good life, and not blaming vulnerable and the weakest in society on their hardship, because just to finish with my comment, because what we can see in South Africa in the last week or 2 weeks or so reminds me it's basically almost the same as similar xenophobic, racist outbursts in Europe. And this is very much used by certain political parties, by certain governments. The difference is that the economic hardship, the social hardship, is put from top to bottom on the weakest in society, both in all circumstances. But in addition to the situation in Europe, and we have seen, let's remember, there were similar racist and xenophobic outbursts and pogroms and everything in UK, in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, only 2 weeks ago. But what comes the additional burden for Africa is the double and triple exploitation through the legacy of colonialism and the continuation of neo-colonialism. And once again, it is Iran has continued its revolution. In Africa, we have seen anti-colonial revolutions that only went so far in economic terms, due to mismanagement and internal failure, but also external pressure. But in Iran, with the revolution of 1979, it was able to continue the revolution also in economic terms, and that is one crucial lesson that could be learned by the allies, by BRICS countries like South Africa, a close ally of the BRICS countries.
We come back to you this time around, Dr. Eddie. Now we are looking at some legal frameworks and what can be done to be able to curtail this problem. When you want to do a bit of monitoring across social media platforms and to see how engaged African youths are, you see that they are more united along lines of division. Like now there are talks about South Africans being xenophobic, and then the point of of contact, or that fabric that brings them together, is usually given less importance. So now let's try to see how legal frameworks like the Constitution, and then maybe anti-discrimination laws, migration statutes, and other aspects that can be from the governing class, and also the role of the civil society in actually playing a major role, positioning themselves in mitigating the flare of anti-migrant protests today and even in the future, so that the dream of a unified Africa is not entangled in the challenges that are probably domestic, which actually are spiraling into some sort of a continental problem, derailing still the agenda of the continent.
Thank you, Clarisse. Very quickly, I like the idea of bringing the civil society in there. Why? Because in this world in which we live, when governments are not upholding to their promises, when the business world and employers are also failing, we have one entity left to do its job, is the civil society. And I want to commend you. I think earlier, my brother Kwame talked about, what this media in here, with the explosion and the explosion in the technologies, of communication, the birth, the creation of this kind of a channel like, for you media that we have, gave us an opportunity to challenge what we are hearing from the mainstream media, although they continue to dominate. That's why I believe, Clarisse, as you talk about the civil society, that there needs to be some additional efforts and investments in our civil society organizations. I have seen a qualitative and a quantitative change. Quantitative is that, many civil society organizations, were created, formed, in the last decade of the 1990s and since the 2000. Great thing, but at the same time, we have also seen, a qualitative advancement of this civil society organization. Qualitative in the sense that, we are no longer dealing with civil society organizations that content themselves with distributing foods, but we have civil society organizations today that are really challenging, our government, or challenging even employers when it comes to people's rights and human rights. That's a great thing. And if there is one civil society organization that we needed to really empower for whatever means or by whatever means, is our social media. But at the same time, also, as you say that, and talking about the legal framework to curtail what is happening, I want to be very cautious in giving our governments another leverage point to continue to suppress the freedom of speech. Right? Because if you look currently, with the explosion of the internet and the social media, I know that, each of those African countries have had an eye on how those social media handles are being used today. Look, during election time, for instance, you have the social media being used sometimes for the propagation of fake news. And that comes from everywhere, from government, from, political actors, political parties, and even, agents like us sometimes. Whether we want it or we don't want it, willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes we propagate this fake news. So there have been some measures in place. Unfortunately, Clarisse, why am I being cautious? I'm cautious because governments have used the so-called control or legal framework to channel, regulate the social media and communication in there to actually suppress again, freedom of information, freedom of speech, and etc. and etc. There are people who have been in jail simply because on their social media handle they said something that the government or the president seemed to be see that it is controversial, or it is insulting, or it is an information that the origin of which they cannot approve. So yes, I will agree that what we share in the news today can sometimes also trigger, right, anger somewhere because it is not true. But then at the same time, I'm very iffy about how we control what is already in place, which is being used to continuously suppress people's freedom of speech, to repeat myself. After saying that, I do agree with you, and I will agree with everybody, that the internet revolution, the globalization of communication today, let's say, put it this way, has come with a lot of benefits, but also with a lot of others, right, problems for us. And the problems have already been laid out by those who spoke before me when it comes, for instance, to controlling the media. As I said, which African countries has a satellite? Which African countries, has a social media that we have created? We are all using, WhatsApp. Some of my friends for the Committee of Action, of which I'm the executive secretary, said that, oh, listen, we need to use WhatsApp because it is secure, it is safe. I said, do you control it? The best way to control the information, make it safe, is not to say it, or to say it when we are in person. But when you put it on a social media handle that you have not created and you say that it is safe, who stores that information? Who receives it? Who distributes it? So there is no safety in terms of that. Look, our African countries, I was at a summit in Nigeria about 3 years ago, and a Nigerian official working for the African Union as well on the internet side, development side, made a point that, was still stayed with me till today. How many African countries, how many governments actually have their own, what you call it, network? You have ministers that are using Google or Gmail. You have ministers using, Hotmail. But who controls Gmail and who controls Hotmail, who controls Yahoo? These are in the hands of the countries. So which means that, my brothers, the government of the United States can request Google, for instance, to submit all this data, and then they will go through it and pace through it to find out who says what, who does not say what. That is not something that, where we control. So we need to think about that one as well. Same thing for the social media, as I said. We are happy to see those young people, unfortunately, using the money that they don't have to buy data. And then at the end of the day, you see them doing some TikTok, while other governments are controlling or trying to control what kind of information or algorithm about TikTok in their countries. In our countries, it is about, mediocrity. And it is the same mediocrity that is feeding into the fake news, all this kind of information, propagating about what is happening in Southern Africa. Whether it is true or not true, sometimes it is also overblown and exaggerated. Clarisse, I want to land on that. I do encourage that, the civil society organizations, whether they're from the media side, human rights, local local civil society organization becomes the lifeline for us to resolve some of those problems, challenges that we are dealing with today.
Thank you so much. Of course, very relevant for Africa today. And of course, how can we navigate all of these and of course ensure that the Pan-African vision, the dream of the African unity is not overwhelmed by the distractions that are coming not from Africa but from elsewhere, and of course weaponizing the vulnerability of people, like the case in South Africa. Coming back to you, Alto Mobley, we know that you are very much looking forward towards seeing a unified Africa, one that understands what unity is all about, what open borders is all about, and of course how this can translate into real development, industrialization of the African continent to harness its human capital for the benefit of the continent. And this is where we want to look at how we can solve a problem where to ensure that this domestic anti-black sentiment do not actually influence countries' willingness to implement the recommendations from the African Union and other major stakeholders across the continent in line with regional integration, be it free movement, a flexible aviation sector, common passport, and of course some harmonized policies that will accompany the Ubuntu philosophy and the dream of unity.
Well, thank you for that question, Clarisse. Certainly, we've got an opportunity on the African continent to really develop Pan-Africanism to a productive level for all of us. We who are outside of the continent, who are of African heritage and descent, really long for a day when Africa controls Africa, Africans control Africa, Africans control their own resources, which gives them the power base to unite the continent and to get rid of, not necessarily dissolve, but get rid of the idea that we have 54, 56 countries and a growing number of countries on the African continent, which causes Europe and the rest of the world to completely ignore all of us. They ignore us because we're powerless. They ignore us because our power is so fractionalized that they can put us all on a bus or a couple of buses and the presidents from a couple of buses and send them somewhere and park them and not even bring them in a meeting, and nothing will change. We have to be at the table, and we're not going to be at the table as long as we're that fractured. If we had less people speaking for all of us, then we would certainly be able to accomplish more. So we want to get beyond the point of Africa being ignored. When TikTok was sold in the US recently, 78 million users in the US, China had to, or they required that China spin off its ByteDance segment of TikTok in the US to a US company. Trump stepped up and said, hey, well, spin it off to my crony over here, Peter Thiel, and let him buy it. It fit well within his purview. China said nothing about where that major media project would be spun off to. We wanted them to spin it off to an African-American company. If you're going to spin it off to someone and China has something to say about it, why not spin it off to an African-American company? That way, Africa now has the ability, as Dr. Edie just mentioned, we have some ownership. We have some structured investment in the social media sphere in a major way. They could have done that, but no, they went along with Trump and spun it right off. So I'm upset with China. I think the Chinese people need to speak up or put up a shut up. They talk about helping Africa. They talk about building infrastructure all over Africa and doing things for Africans. And then when you have something as vital as having to spin off a segment of your property to an African company or a company that would benefit Africa, you just bypass the chance to do it. So we have to be on the mind and on the radar of even those countries that say that they ally with African ambitions and they're part of the global South, they're part of the BRICS countries, but yet they don't act to facilitate the cohesiveness of Africa. No one is supporting the coming together of Africa in a way that would empower Africa. I'll say this and I will end on it. Uganda recently discovered that it has $14 trillion in gold in the ground in Uganda. $14 trillion. I mean, it's amazing. That is an amazing amount, that is amazing supply that is in the ground in Africa, in the ground under Uganda. Who does that gold belong to? I submit that it doesn't belong to Uganda, it belongs to all of us. I submit that what's in the Congo and what's in the South Africa and what's in Zimbabwe and what's being dug up out of Sudan right now belongs to all of us. And we as a continent, as a people, have to control the resources and raw materials that are leaving the continent in order to be a true nation state that other people respect. We talk about size, we talk about India and Russia and China and Canada and the US being the #1 largest economies in the world, but we skip over the fact that they're also the largest geographic areas in the world. If Africa commanded more geography instead of fractionalizing into these little small splintered countries, no matter what your history is, you are less important in the narrative because you are a fractional country. You're a small country. Africa needs to be bigger. Africa needs to be the biggest economy in the world so that no one can deny us a seat at the table.
Very imperative. Thank you so much, Author Mobley. And we are coming back to you, Ambi FOKWA. Let's look at how this situation, because our focus this day is to see how Afrophobia can probably do not affect the dream of African unity, do not have some sort of negative effects on the Ubuntu philosophy, especially as we see that the practical aspect of it coming from Burkina Faso and Sahel state. And now every revolution will always have some sort of challenges. So how can this situation shape policies and even borders, and also redefine Pan-Africanism with the present 21st century realities?
I like that question. Essentially, it's lessons we should be learning from the so-called Afrophobia, contextual framing and agenda setting, which the Western media newswires took to use to highlight a situation that we were having in our continent. Really, what should we be learning from all of this? Said like that, we already have identified that we should be learning that the West shouldn't be leading our narratives. The African Union, unfortunately, has failed in an aspect that it shouldn't have, because what's so difficult to organize the member states under you to pledge some type of funding to form an African media communication network? I mean, those of us who are media professionals on the panel, I'm sure as we reflect on that question, it should blow our minds why we know we can do correspondence in independent networks or state networks to even volunteer or be contributed on some allowance. We would definitely contribute information to such a network if we knew there were some studios allocated in each African country by each government to allow us to channel information towards those centers under the AU so that it can coordinate a continental voice. And this continental voice, it must not be a voice in which we say kumbaya, every African country is going to be there. Looking towards a solution, we are at a point where South Africa has taught us that the whole idea of kumbaya in Africa, it does not actually exist. It never has existed. And you shouldn't be sad to say this. Europe is there. They fought in the past. They still achieved the European Union with a Schengen visa, which allows their people to travel through the various countries and in one way or another through the proper legislative channels, legal channels, have a job, work, contribute. We should be learning that even if there's no kumbaya, instead of thinking of federation, we can talk of confederacy and identify those actors, those countries, those organizations, those presidents who genuinely want to contribute to such a vision, like what the AES with Captain Traore have already created as an example. You see the AES Confederacy. It's already there. That's why, I mean, South Africa taught us that we're at a point where we can't keep excusing ourselves to say, oh, it's the colonialism, oh, it's the enslavement, oh, it's the past. The precedents are there. We know that. What are we doing concretely now such that every state in Africa that was created as a colonial corporation should have governments in which the civil servants and political representatives from the indigenous nations in which those colonial corporations were created over have the right to express the sovereignty of those indigenous nations through that colonial corporate structure without the European colonial invaders and their post-neo-colonial influences and manipulations still having dominance over the economy, such that the resources in these indigenous nations, which should also benefit the people in those areas, as well as the colonial state, are fairly shared, such that we could even have funds, little quotas that our states could contribute as members to an AU African media network, so that we could speak our own narrative and voice and condition our minds, condition our people right to the grassroots level that this is how you must think. You should not reason that you would have an agent from the West in your country and he would be manipulating vaccines like the Epstein files revealed to us, and you would just allow it to go if it was disguised as an NGO. Our people should be that conscious, that politically conscious, that geopolitically aware of the espionage and manipulations. And if we don't get to that through learning from this example from South Africa, that a colonial settler European government established a certain level of economic efficiency there, but we should not go there and lean on it to the point that it becomes such a burden to the people in that nation, honestly, with their own realities. Apartheid 1994 is when we can say it ended, but we had, you know, our freedom and independence in the 60s. It's not correct. We should be learning from all of this, that we are at a crossroads where the writing is on the wall, fellow Africans, honestly.
Indeed,
this is RBG. This is Marcus Garvey. We need to go back home and build our lands. That's what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambe. Indeed, we are at a crossroad, like you highlighted. There's some sort of, you know, I don't know if I should call it an attack on African media, and I'm one of the people being pursued, of course, for having an alternative narratives, especially as we are trying to shape the agenda for the continent Africa by ensuring mental emancipation to be able to solve these problems of Afrophobia, and of course give a different definitions even to these terms. And we come back to you, Good News, Cadogan. We are still looking at the way forward, and when Dr. Eddie was talking earlier on, he made mention about the fact that when there is stiff control on social media, it can lead to human rights violations. So I would love us to understand, to find where we need, you know, some sort of a point of compromise where it is necessary to control, you know, what is on social media. This is what we call selective perception and exposure, to ensure that the overall agenda of a nation is not misinterpreted to serve the interest of globalists or those having some political agendas for the country, like South Africa. South Africa today, a few years ago, the country was acclaimed for championing a case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. Just last year, we saw the country being applauded diplomatically because South Africa stood before the U.S. President Donald Trump to defend the African continent using South Africa when he challenged the narrative that there were some sort of deliberate attacks on white Afrikaners in South Africa. And then after that, you now see a flare in the country where other Africans are turning against other Africans, calling them like, you know, immigrants, and blaming them for their jobs. So I want to look at how, you know, there is the position for this control to ensure that the country's overall agenda is not made vulnerable because the population, the youthful population, is not aware of the insights or probably the complex text of affairs regarding the situation at the moment.
A great question, Clarisse. I am trained in the integral way of thinking. So integral psychology, integral coaching, and looking at leadership from a values-based point of view. To say individually, if I grow well enough to be grounded in what I believe in, I should be able then to behave in ways that are derived from my beliefs and my values. But that is not enough. The next stage of that development is about ensuring that the collective values, in this case, of a nation, of a region, of a continent, are built such that there is some kind of shared beliefs, shared values. Once you increase the level of consciousness and values that are shared in a society, the need for control is actually diminished. The reason governments across the world try to control their people is because they haven't done enough to build a guided coalition towards a shared set of beliefs, a shared set of values. Pan-Africanism, insofar as Africa is concerned, is something that is as old as when the Berlin Conference set to actually create extractive economies on the continent. The flare-up of what is happening in South Africa today, I do not want to just attribute it to the global and the geopolitical kind of challenges that we face as a country. But I also want to take part of it is about the failure of government in the last 30 years to build a strong society that has got strong beliefs around where we're going as a country. If you look around in South Africa, for example, amongst the leaders, I focus on the C-suite executives in our coaching practice. And also in the public sector, around the ministers in government, and also executive directors of non-profit organizations, as well as formations around the ownership of community-based economic structures, like, for example, the cooperatives. Very few people are aware of Agenda 2063 and what it's all about. What we are trying to create as a continent to have our own version of millennial development goals that take the continent in a particular direction. So I am totally against, I support what Eric said earlier on around the need not to support government control, because government control can be abused. But I would rather support a situation whereby there is a canvassing of a set of values that drive the community, that drive the nation to believe in certain things that will take that nation within the context of the region and the continent to go towards certain things. And in the case then, South Africa would not have failed to create industries that would create employment over the last 30 years if that was a shared belief amongst those who control the means of production and those who actually depend on those means of production for employment. So there is a need for us to say, how then do we ensure there is governance within the borders of South Africa and outside the borders of South Africa, such that there is no automatic migration down south of the citizens of the continent because it is not palatable for them to remain where they are in their own countries. How do we ensure that tribalism, propensity for violence as a means of resolving conflict is actually reduced? There's a whole program around silencing the guns in Africa and making sure that through negotiations and other means we are able to resolve our conflicts. So it's important for us then to say, rather than controlling, let's find values that will tie us together so that we can create a pathway towards Agenda 2063 and have an Africa that is able to control all the good stuff that we have said here, control the media, control the narrative, but not really control the people, but influence the people to see the light within the context of geopolitical dynamics, so that in the end, We may create an Africa that is united, because at the level of person to person, like we are here now as this panel, I see a wonderful kind of debate. No one is throwing insults at anyone. We are different and diverse. We are not the same, but at the same time, we are seeking solutions that will help the continent, help South Africa to overcome the kind of problems that we have. There's an understanding, rather than condoning the bad things that are happening in South Africa, but an understanding of why those things are happening, so that in the end, we may be able to say, let's create solutions that will work down south of the Limpopo River and also all the way up to Cairo, and create a continent that is able to support its citizens, because it has taken care of the beneficiation of the wealth that sits beneath the ground. That's all I can say for now.
Amazing, thank you, of course. And to be able to accomplish this, we need to ensure the philosophy or the policy of transparency and accountability at its utmost level across every government or country in the African continent. Coming to you, Dr. Mala, you talked earlier on about reimagining the future of Africa. Let us try to see how this concept ties with what is on the table at this juncture, to see that there is a clear definition of what I will reiterate unity is, what free borders or open borders is, what a common passport is, so that there is not too much ambiguity in the minds of Africans in reacting to the continental agenda, like the Agenda 2063, and also free movement that sometimes people don't understand that all of these will go along existing policies or laws to ensure that it is coordinated, minimizing the challenges of such an agenda.
Thank you. Agenda 2063 of the African Union that my co-panelist Brother GOODNEWS was talking about it, and he actually said exactly the same thing I was saying about even the national ones, and that's true because he said something which is true for Cameroon, true for Chad, true for Congo, and many other countries on the continent that have long-term visions. Why? With the notable exceptions, of course, of countries like Benin that just recently launched their new development vision that came out from a consultative process across the nation. Most of these documents, people don't really know where they came from. So they are usually concocted somewhere by consultants hired by bureaucrats, whether they are continental bureaucrats or national ones. And so there is a need for people to feel that they are listened to and that their aspirations and wishes are used to design and build the visions of what they want for themselves. And that way, then people will have ownership of development visions. It's only in that way that they can. If you don't build with them, build for them, and build from them, generally people would think that most of our development visions are slogans or political slogans. I think that's one thing I would say. But the other thing for me is about freedom of movement for people and goods, and even the whole thing about an African unique passport. I think I totally support that we should have freedom of movement on the continent. We should have both political and economic integration, because right now, as GOODNEWS was saying, person to person, I don't really think that Africans have any, putting aside a few people in South Africa who are showing this kind of xenophobia these days. Personally, on a one-on-one, Africans don't have issues. We recognize ourselves, our brotherhood, not only within the continent, but also elsewhere in the world with the spread of the African diaspora, both of old and of today. But I think that what is even essential is that crime should be crime and should be treated as crime wherever it is. If someone is found in Cameroon and has come from country X or country Y and commits a crime, they should be dealt with according to the laws in force. But I don't really feel that if we want to be to grow and to develop and prosper as the strongest continent that we should be, there is no need for any African to be called undocumented in another African country. The only sense in which I think we can try to, or we should try to document movement of people is if we want to have maybe statistics for good governance. But we should not be documenting people in the sense that I need an authorization to live in Ghana, or that a Ghanaian needs an authorization to live in Cameroon. You know, like what is important is that if I'm in Ghana, I should respect the laws of Ghana and I should not commit crimes in Ghana. And if there is a Ghanaian in Cameroon, he should not commit crimes. So for me, criminality should be the issue that we deal with. But Africans, as we move towards having a passport, we should remember one thing. I don't know, but from so far, the many languages that I speak, which are indigenous in Cameroon, because my brother AMBE was also talking about indigeneity and these First Nations. I want to learn on this by saying this. I don't know any very good word in my Mbesa language or in other languages that I speak in Cameroon that stands for identity card or for passport, and that this word existed before colonization. I don't know. Absolutely, I don't know any of that. These are, if you see in most of our languages, we are trying to invent words for this reality because we defined ourselves in a different way. I'm not saying we should go back to the 16th century or the 15th century. I'm not saying we should burn our passport, but I think we should look beyond these papers and see the humanity in our brother from South Africa, in our brother from Zambia, in our brother from Cote d'Ivoire and elsewhere on the continent. And it is only this way that we can unite. And then, because we're still lucky, we have been plundered for centuries, but we are still the richest continent on earth, which means that once we solve the political, economic equation of real unity, there is nothing that can stop us as a continent.
Okay, thank you so much. Very imperative, Dr. Data. Now it's looking at how the diversity of the continent can be used as a force and not as, an instrument of division. How can we, do you think, or what analysis can you give to, instead of the term Afrophobia, maybe a new connotation can be given to probably give some value to the diversity of culture and language, among other things, to try to build that unity and mitigate the effect of this unity that starts from the mind among young people, particularly who are actually the agents that are being used to execute all of the agenda that serves just the interest of the few.
Sorry, thank you very much. That's a very interesting point and aspect because, I mean, it's, I also mentioned before several times that we are speaking here about Africa, but vast continent, vast diverse continent, and in this diversity actually lies also its strength, as long as it is a diversity understood and grounded in a shared also Pan-African identity, because you need unity, you need cooperation to be strong enough to face the challenges that we have discussed for the last 2 hours in relation vis-a-vis the imperialist North and imperialist Western Europe and America. But building on this diversity, turning this diversity and taking the most important aspects to build a strong, diverse unity. So using that term to establish, as we discussed the last 2 hours, with this one particular subject that was coming up all the time: media, the narrative, building. This is essential. This is essential to emancipate through this shared cooperation in a a diverse but still united continent. This must be the vision that we are aiming for, because so far, if there is now external actors are trying for their own purpose from time to time to establish an artificial diversity, a negative diversity, by breaking up states and establishing puppet regimes, like most recently we have seen in Somaliland, similar attempts in Libya a few years ago, and this is then tremendously not only harming the African continent, the African unity, but the geopolitics as such is divide and conquer. So it would be essential to build a sense and build an understanding of a positive diversity that builds on the strongest quality of the continent, and in this way, once again, uniting regarding a Pan-African vision that can stand up against Europe, against America, because as one of the speakers mentioned, all these positive examples regarding the European Union with Schengen, and so on and so forth. Europe is also very much diverse. So in this sense, I don't want to use the European Union as a good example. It has very positive sides, as a previous speaker mentioned. But after all, it is an imperialist project to dominate Africa and other parts of the global south. So. But yeah, as I said, seeing the diversity that is there as something positive, which enables all people to learn from each other, to share experiences, and in this way, you are building strength against the challenges that we've just discussed in the last 2 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the program, but before we go, I'll just have 1 minute per person to give some sort of a take-home message as we continue to watch events across the African continent. And this time around, I kick off with you, Good News, Cadogan. 1 minute, please.
Beautiful. I will take less than a minute.
Okay, no problem.
For me, what is important is adherence to governance and the rule of law. Indeed. Is important on both sides of the border. Because I'm speaking from South Africa, I'm saying it's important for those who are unhappy in South Africa to adhere to the rule of law. And it's important for the government to take charge and lead and ensure that the government voice is there to actually ensure that migration is managed in a manner that does not damage the person-to-person relationships that we already have. Yeah, that's all I would like to say.
Indeed, thank you so much to be able to ensure that the present state do not damage the trajectory that is already in place for South Africa and other countries in Africa. Dr. Mala, take-up message, and of course in line with the reimagining Pan-Africanism and contextualizing it with the realities of a multipolar world.
Yes, my take home is we should not be sidetracked by the events in South Africa. That's just one of the challenges we have as a continent. But the moment we over-fixate on it, we are going to lose track of the most important things that we have to do. I think there is much more that binds us together as Africans across these imaginary colonial borders. There is much that binds us together than what divides us. And in the current geopolitical dispensation, a new world order is coming into place. And that new world order is the one in which Africa has to play a very strategic and important role. We can only play that role if we come together and we turn this whole Pan-Africanism from being a slogan, from being words, and from being just discussions on panels like this into reality on the ground. Because if we don't, we are still going to be losers in the new world order that is emerging. But if we do unite, if we strategize, because nostalgia and diagnosis and complaints are not strategies, we must come together as people, bring up strategies for moving forward and in a way that makes us a respectable people with sovereignty over our resources, with sovereignty over ourselves and our bodies, so that we can be respected in the international community.
Absolutely, carving our own niche in the international community. Author Mobley, can we say we need to draw some sort of a preamble for an African order that will help solve continental problems and promote the Ubuntu philosophy?
Absolutely. I think that Africa must unite, come together, and I see that as a very, very real possibility. Dr. Dinesh mentioned the example of the European Union. I bring the example of the United States. I live in Arizona, which is a state out west in America, and I visit. I'm visiting tomorrow Illinois and Michigan. Don't need a passport. I can just go. But these states are solid entities, and they're each governed independently. There are many structures that Africa can use as a model. China is another great model to create, again, a continental structure that encompasses all countries as opposed to leaving it fractional. So I'll leave on that note.
Thank you so much, AMBE, FOKWA. Of course, we've understood on this panel that it is not a crisis, it's a challenge. It can only become a crisis if external actors get a hold of the situation. So what a message, especially for protesting South Africans at this juncture?
Well, what I can do for my fellow South Africans is just a final statement that we have understood your conflict and we see the relationship to what has happened in the rest of the continent. It's unfortunate that President Ramaphosa was not able to have the audience with President Mahama of Ghana, and incidentally, in the context of the current events, has gone to France to begin to have some foreign relations with President Macron. We know the colonial relationship and history there. That's what we want to avoid. So we've learned so many lessons that as we see South Africa was leading us into BRICS, we need to maintain the diplomacy that we originally had as a continent that was going to define our future together. So when I said confederate structure, those of us who want to work together, let's continue to work together. What we see happening around us should not derail us. We're still on path.
Indeed. Thank you so much. We end with you, Dr. Dieter. Of course, the Global South and, of course, all the actors are writing a new perspective across the international lines in global politics, diplomacy, especially human-to-human diplomacy. And now the take-home message from you will be in line on how maybe South African authorities and the African Union as a whole can redefine some human-to-human diplomacy that will help mitigate the pressure or the resentment coming from frustrated youths, so that they can be able to be calm, to discern and see the available opportunities for them.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one needs to learn from the challenges and the difficulties in a positive way to overcome them and become stronger. This must, there are external actors all the time who aim to weaken Africa, the African people for their own interests, and they're putting pressure on them through the media narratives. But the opposite needs to happen. These all these challenges that we currently witnessing need to be taken on board. The lessons need to be drawn to strengthen not only South Africa, the whole African continent, because we are at a crucial point in history. The transatlantic hegemony is ending. We are marching towards a multipolar world, but it is a difficult and it's a march. And for that, the world needs a strong Africa that provides leadership, and Africa, if it is strong and has a clear vision, it can provide leadership. We just have seen that with the example of South Africa's courageous stand at the ICC against the genocide in Gaza. This was an excellent example of how Africa can actually provide leadership to the world, and based on this experience, Africa needs to unite and strengthen for the good of the world in a multipolar world. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just to note that geopolitics can actually turn the unrest in South Africa into some sort of regional crisis, and that is what today on Global Insight it has been concluded that the situation is still at the level of a challenge, meaning it can be addressed, and this goes to policymakers, civil society, and other stakeholders, ensuring that speculations and even intelligence information should be able to guide all of these actors towards making coordinated and practical decisions that will solve the situation in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa, so that the dream of a unified Africa is not tainted by the vulnerability of Africans being weaponized for political gains, serving the interest of the few. And it is on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that we're drawing the curtains into today's edition of the discursive program Global Insights, while acknowledging the great analysis from our guest, our panel of experts, also appreciating the technical body for ensuring that the program was a success. We hope to have you again subsequently as we continue to educate, inform through our platform brought to you by Globus.
This program was brought to you by Globus.